long regressions where I was a little child when they were building the pyramids, and it was like super visceral, and I was like playing, and adults were dragging things and I was being a pest. So then I went to Egypt. I guess I was 25 maybe, and I was really shocked to find that the pyramids were like right next to Burger King. It's pretty wild. It's I mean, and actually, I was talking to an Egyptian guy last week, and he said, it wasn't that the pyramids used to be way far away. They were never meant to be like right in the city of Cairo. They were meant to be sort of way off in the distance. But what happened was, of course, the city just grew and mushroomed, and eventually tourist things sort of boomed all around the pyramids. And now it's like you take the bus right up to Burger King and you walk to the pyramids. But they're still really, really incredible and powerful. It's just super powerful. I'm excited. I made a little PowerPoint for us today too, which I don't know why I haven't been doing that, but there were just so many images that I was like, oh, people need to see these. They're so stunning. So we can get started. And are you familiar at all with the creation myth of Egypt? It's really interesting. I love it. So it starts, of course, as most of them do, with just a big, vast ocean of swirling chaos and nothingness, and just nothing as far as the eye can see. And then all of a sudden, amidst these chaotic waters and this darkness, this mound of earth rises up. And on top of the mound of earth is a god named Atum. And Atum is the one who's sort of the father of everything. And Atum, you can sort of picture him like standing there on this little mound, like a little island in the middle of nothing. And he's looking around and he feels really, really lonely. And so he mates with his own shadow, because that's the only thing around. And so he mates with his own shadow, and he creates two children. And his two children, let me get the names right. Children are Shu and Tefnut. Shu is the god of the air, and Tefnut is the god of moisture, so air and water. And so he creates these children, air and water, and he sends them off. He says, go ahead and go make the world. And so Shu and Tefnut, they go fly away, and their job is to go create something. But as soon as they leave, Atum starts to feel really lonely again. And he thinks, oh, this is not what I wanted. I didn't want to be alone. And so he takes his eye, one of his eyes, he pulls it right out of his socket, and he sends it off after them so that it can watch over them. And so that's the origin of that idea, which I had never known, was that Egyptian eye that you see the symbol of so much, the Eye of Ra, it's called. And so that's Atum's eye. And we'll get to why his name is Ra as well in a moment. So Atum's eye follows them and eventually finds them, and they come back. They come back to their father, and they failed. They actually didn't know how to create anything. They didn't make anything. But when they come back, Atum is so happy that he weeps tears of joy. And from his tears, as his tears fall onto the earth, little men and women start to spring up. And so they did create something after all, but it took all three of them. And so as all the little men and women start to spring up, they realize they're just still on this tiny little hill, and there isn't enough room for them. And so the two Shu and Tefnut, is that right? Yeah, Shu and Tefnut, the two children of Atum, they mate together, and they create the earth and the sky. And so the earth is Geb, and the sky is Nut or Nut. And I want to show you an image. I am really enamored with this sky goddess, Nut. And she looks, hang on, let me get I always forget how to do, share screen. There we go. Okay. So there she is, right? Can you see her there? It worked. Okay, good. It worked. So you see on the top, she's like the original downward dog. I think maybe this is where downward dog came from. But her body is the stars and all the celestial bodies, the planets and the stars and the Milky Way. The Egyptians say that the Milky Way is the embodiment. That's her astral body, the goddess Nut. And then below on the bottom there, you have Geb. And so Nut and Geb, they give the humans some place to live. They make the earth and they make the sky. and they fall in love with each other, Newt and Gab, and they are so completely enamored with each other that they never ever want to be separate. And this bothers Atum, their grandfather. He thinks, oh, that's not right. They're brother and sister. There's something wrong with that, which to me is sort of like, wait, but the other ones were brother and sister too. So I don't know why he's got a problem with these two being brother and sister. And it happens a lot because gods in these stories, they can only mate with other gods. And so your pool is really small. And so very often in the stories, the gods will marry their brother or sister. And so in this case, Atum decides that he's got to separate them, that they can't be together all the time. And so he takes Newt and he throws her up into the sky and he pins her there. And so she stays there and she becomes this beautiful arch that holds us. And her two arms and her two legs are the four cardinal directions. And then Geb stays on the ground. And there's another story that the air was so jealous of their connection, how they loved each other so much that it got in between them. And so that's why we have the earth and then the air and then all the planets and celestial bodies. And here's another image of Nuch, the goddess of the sky and the stars. And this one too, I couldn't pick, they were all so beautiful. She's got this veil, and the idea of the veil will come up a few times too, that the veil kind of, these goddesses fold the veil over us and sort of hold us in their veil. And then I'll stop the share for a moment here and check the chat. Beautiful, right? Yeah. Takes me a minute more when I have a share screen and I have to figure out like, okay, close the chat. So just, it was a little bit stodgy, just give me a break on that. But so Newt's high above, Geb is below, they're fastened there and they could see each other, but they could never touch. But it was too late because they had already mated and they had 5 children. You didn't separate them soon enough. It said that Newt was so sexy. She was like so totally sexual, like probably the kind of woman that now we would slut shame, but we know better than that. We're getting away from that. So she was just like sexy and always wanted to make out and have sex. And so Atum was really like, that's not okay. You can't be doing that. You can't be making babies every day. And so she went to the moon actually, and they devised a way around it because the year used to only be 360 days. And so they went and they asked the moon, can you please make it 365? So they got 5 extra days. And they kind of worked around the system. And so while she was banned from having sex on 360 days, on those 5 days, she could do whatever she wanted. And so she has 5 babies. Oh, one more person coming in. So that's why I love, in these stories, we're always trying to find, hey, Maria, glad you made it. We're always trying to find stories of powerful women, right? And for some of you haven't been coming to these before, and it's always about like, where can we either find powerful women in history and mythology, or where do we reframe the stories and tell new stories? Because we really need to do that. We really need to keep the tradition of myth alive. And if we just take it all, it's like yoga or any other thing, if we just take it all as gospel and dogma, and this is the way it is, and it never evolves, that doesn't serve us. And so to find the stories or to reframe the stories, I think is really important. So anyway, so Nut gives birth to 5 children. Her 5 children are Osiris, Isis, Nephthys, Set or Seth, and Horus the Elder. And they become really important gods and goddesses, and we're going to tell all of their stories. But a little more about Nut, because I just love Nut. So I'll go back to that image of Nut here. So share screen. There we go. So Nut is... the Milky Way is seen as her celestial body. She has her legs up one side of the world, the belly across the ceiling, and her arms down the other side. And every night she goes to Earth. And so she's been separated from her beloved Earth, but at night she descends and they embrace again. And that's why it gets dark and all the stars come down to us. There's other stories about her that she swallows and rebirths the sun and the stars every day. So she travels across the sky and she eats the sun and digests it, and then she births it out through her vulva, actually comes back out. And so she's this very motherly goddess. And she's the barrier that separates the forces of chaos from our world. And it's said that when it gets really wild and stormy, that means she's come closer. And so I think it sort of feels like she's hovering around us a lot these days. Maybe it's not a bad thing when the storms come and they rearrange everything and nothing's the same afterwards. So it feels like we're kind of really visibly in a historic time like that. Her laughter creates thunder, and her tears are the rain. And I think we're supposed to have thunderstorms tonight. So if we do, you can run out and you can let its tears fall on you. So that's her. Let me go back to the creation myth. And so you got these 5 children, of which one of them is Isis. Here's Isis. And she's the one I think we're most familiar with, that image, right, of the wings. And she's got that amazing, always with like a tight sheath dress, which must have been really uncomfortable to walk in. I'm surprised. We talk a lot. We've talked about Artemis a lot before too. And Isis and Artemis are really closely connected. And it just reminded me, I thought of Artemis for a moment, how she was like, one of the things I want is to not have to wear that stupid long dress. I love that about her. But Isis didn't say that. Maybe Isis really likes her long, tight dress. It makes her feel like a badass. But she is the daughter of Nut and Geb. And eventually the first story that we hear about her actually has to do with Atum. Atum is her great-grandfather, right? He's the one who started everything. And he actually, even though we have this sort of lovely story about Atum where he weeps when his children come back, he was not the nicest guy. And he was sort of known as this cruel old tyrant. And everybody really was sick of him. And he would travel, so he's the sun god. And so he would travel with the sun, he would take it across the skies every day. But he got older and older and he would drool. And so he would take his son across the sky and he would drip trails of drool. And so Isis decides that she's going to trick him into giving up his power because he's been such a tyrant. And so she, let me get the story right here. So Atum wasn't he's a cruel tyrant, so she decided to set things right. Every time he traveled across the sky, he dripped drool, and Isis collected one strand of this drool, and she turned it into a snake, a really, really poisonous, venomous snake. And she makes the snake, and she places it right at the edge of the horizon. So just as he's finishing his traveling across the sky, the snake bites him, and he's full of poison. I mean, it's like he's going to die. He's crying, and Isis, she's the goddess of medicine as well. And so he calls out to Isis, help me, I need your medicine. And she says, tell me your real name. Now there's a whole thing with this real name thing. So she's the one, they call Isis the one who knows the names. And the idea is that your power is in your real true name, and you don't give that away. And so everyone calls him Atum, but no one knows actually what his true name is, because that's where all of his magic is. And so she says, I'll give you the antidote to this venom, but you must tell me your name. And he says, no, I'll never do that. I'll never do that. And she turns and walks away. She's like, fine, we don't need you. And finally he says, okay, Ra. So he's Ra, the god of the sun. And as soon as he says Ra, there's like a zap. And all of his power leaves him and it goes right into Isis. And so she gets all of this power because she is the one who gets people to speak their true name. And I think that's sort of an astoundingly beautiful story about truth, about power, about getting people to really open their hearts. I don't know, what do you think? Do you have any thoughts about that story? I just thought it was so interesting. Tell me your name, your real name, and she gets the power.
What's that, Callie? What's the fairy tale? Is Rumpelstiltskin? having trouble with that one.
Yeah.
Where she has to figure out what his real name is. I feel like that
Uh-huh.
comes up in a lot of these stories of this idea of the power of like who you really are, and if someone gets that from you,
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
definitely.
It's also true in Judaism, like you don't say, you say Hashem, which means like the name, like you don't actually say the name out loud because it holds esoteric power. So there's this power in uttering the syllables,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting in a tradition like yoga where we're chanting like Om or these sacred sounds on purpose, right? It's like, do you want to hold power? Or do you want to actually share it?
Yeah,
with
that's interesting.
people that need it.
Definitely. So I'll go back here to Isis and show you some. Well, first I'll show you Osiris here. Share screen. Okay, so this is Osiris. He's always pictured green. And he actually didn't hang around that long. So what happened was Osiris, he became the king. Osiris was the king of Egypt and all the lands. Really, the idea was the king of everything, the whole universe. And Isis was his queen. And they were really incredible rulers, loving and kind and just and righteous and generous and just really wonderful people. And as you can imagine, there were some people that didn't like that. It always seems to be the way that there's always some slime ball that just hates do-gooders, which reminded me of the Yoga Sutra, right? 1.33. This is when people are happy, you be happy for them. When they're suffering, you practice compassion. And when they're righteous, you're joyful about that. And when they're not, you don't lose your mind. So the brother of Isis and Osiris, Set or Seth, was really mad about them being in power, and he did not want that. He wanted to get Osiris out of there so he could control the kingdom. And so what happened was that Osiris would go and spread, the idea was that he spread culture. He would bring like writing and paper and music and the arts all over the world. And so he would leave Isis for a long time. And one time he was gone for 10 years. 10 years he was all around spreading the word, spreading joy, spreading music, spreading art. And Isis was so lonely and she missed him so much. Just as he was about to come home, his brother Set said, listen, before you go back home, we want to have a big party for you. We want to welcome you back. We love you so much. You're so cool. So come to my party. And this is a common theme in stories like this too, that the good guy's always like, okay, even though it's obviously a setup, right? We see this in the Bhagavad Gita too, when they have the game of dice. Like, and as the reader, you're like, don't go. But he goes because he's just a trusting, loving guy. And so he goes to this party and Set comes out and he's made this exquisite box. It's this golden box. It's like a sarcophagus, almost like a really fancy coffin. And he shows it to all the people at the party. And he's like, look at this exquisite thing that I've made. And he says, who wants to try to fit into it? Whoever it fits gets to have it, this precious gift. And so, of course, he has gotten Osiris's exact measurements by torturing his tailor. But Osiris doesn't know this. So it's like a little bit like Cinderella here. And so everybody tries to fit the shoe in. Everybody tries to get into the box, but nobody can fit it just right. And finally, Osiris is like, I want to try. And Set plays the game. He's like, oh, no. You have too many beautiful things. You don't need this, brother. But Osiris is like, come on, everybody else got to play the game. Why don't I get to do it? And finally Set says, okay, come on in. Well, of course he fits perfectly. And as soon as they get him in there, boom, they close the lid. They cover the whole thing with hot boiling lead. And they basically burn him alive. It's really sad. And they take this whole sarcophagus now that's been sealed in lead and covered with boiling lead, and they just toss it into the river, where it goes down the river and it lands in the reeds. Now Isis finds out, and of course she is there's Isis completely devastated, and she goes to look for him. She looks all over until finally she hears about this weird object that has floated into the reeds somewhere down the river, and she goes to get it. And eventually she does find him, and she brings him back. You know, she brings him, he's not alive, but she brings him back, and they have to hide because they don't want Set to find them. But eventually Set does find them, and he realizes that she's got the corpse of her husband, and he's so mad about that. He can't even let her have that. You know, some people, again, I keep thinking of the Bhagavad Gita about how the bad guys say, we wouldn't even give them enough land to drive the head of a pin through. You know, that's what happens when you're so nasty that you can't even let someone have anything. You know, you just want it all for yourself. And he's like, no, it's not okay that she's got him back. And so he goes and he breaks open the sarcophagus, and he chops Osiris up into 13 pieces and throws them all through the universe. And so Isis turns herself into a bird, a sparrow, and she goes all over, and she looks for all the pieces. And this is the funny part of the story, I think, is that she finds 12 pieces. She finds everything except for his penis. So she puts them all together. There's two different versions of this story. Well, I'm sure there's more than two, but kind of two main ones. And one is that she puts all the pieces together, and she creates, through her own power of magic, she creates the last piece, the missing piece. And so how badass is that? You know, what a cool woman. She makes her own penis. She's like, I don't need a penis. I'll make one. And in other stories, she turns herself into a kite, and she just flies around over the body of Osiris that she's put back together. And somehow she magically gets impregnated. But either way, she's sort of got something in common with these Greek goddesses. And some stories say it's golden, a golden phallus. I love that. Right? She's super badass. This is like the best vibrator of all time. The best dildo ever. So she's really got this connection to these other goddesses that we've talked about from Greek mythology, the virgin goddesses, and how there's this element associated with them. That virgin is not a bad thing, or it's not like a thing to be ashamed of. It's a powerful thing. It's like, no, they don't even need no man. They are totally, you know, they own themselves. Nobody can own them. And so Iris is very much in that line of goddesses like that, like Artemis. And so she makes a child, right? And so she manages somehow through a miracle and through her own magical power to make a child, and the child is named Horus. And that child is destined to become the king. And so they have to defeat Seth, and they go through all these various battles to defeat her brother, her awful, evil brother. And at one point, they're so close to defeating him, and Isis has the opportunity to kill him, and she doesn't. And so she's known, this is one of the things associated with Isis, is that she rather than destroy her enemies, she always shows them mercy. Almost always. And there are even stories about when she was in hiding with the sarcophagus that contained her husband, that some woman was really awful and nasty to her, terrible woman, and the woman's child was there in the reeds, and there were scorpions were a really big problem in Egypt back then. I don't know if they still are, but scorpions had climbed all over this little baby. And now Isis could have just stood back and been like, look, you treated me like shit, I'm going to let the scorpions have your baby. But instead she saves the baby. And the woman is so, so indebted to her. And so this tells you how Isis was, she's a goddess of justice. And she always took the high road. She always did it, even to her own detriment, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, you know, but that's what she did. And so when it got so close that she could almost destroy Set, at the last second, she didn't. And her son Horus got so mad at her. He was like, Mom, this was our chance. He got so mad he couldn't contain his rage, and he chopped her head off. So we see this in a lot of the Hindu stories as well. Shiva chopping Ganesha's head off, things like that. And so he chops her head off, but she's like, no, it's cool. I'm a magical witch goddess, so no big deal. And she puts the head of a cow on. And so she's associated with a cow. Often she has cow horns. And eventually they do defeat Set. Horus does become the ruler of all of Egypt and the entire universe. Her name means throne, and Isis means throne. And she often, let me see if you can see it in these images here. She so much, but in a lot of images, she has a crown, and her crown is an empty throne. The empty throne symbolizes how her husband was lost. So let's see, what else about them? She brings him back, makes a child. So what happens to Osiris now, right? So Osiris, she brings him back to life to make a baby just for one day. So her powers are just strong enough that she can reanimate him for one day. But this creates the whole basis for mummies in the afterlife. And so Osiris becomes the first mummy. And so he becomes the king of the afterlife, the underworld. And the underworld, not like hell, it's not seen as a bad thing. It's actually seen as sort of like paradise. And before this happened, only kings could go on to this. They called it the field of reeds. The field of reeds, which was the afterlife, the heaven, the paradise, and only kings could go until this all happened with Osiris. And once Osiris became the king of the afterlife, because he was so wonderful and he loved all beings, anyone could come. And so this was the first time that Egyptians felt like they had this beautiful afterlife to aspire to. And so that's why they started making mummies and building pyramids and all of this stuff, so that they could take all their cool stuff, like cats, we'll get to that later, but they could take all their cool stuff with them, and they got to be basically like in the retinue of Osiris. If you were a good, righteous human being, if you were a kind, loving person, then you got to hang out with Osiris in your afterlife. And so he's always thought of as the king of the afterlife. She's associated with this idea of having a veil. And I'll show you this cool, there's this one image that I showed you already, share screen, right? This one, I found this whole series. Hang on, there's like a truck outside my door. I'm just gonna shut my door quick. Oh, they're cleaning my gutters. It was not too loud. So I found this whole beautiful series of images of real women dressed as Egyptian goddesses. And I found it on Pinterest. So if you're interested, I can email it to you, or you can just Google it on Pinterest. But this is one, Isis with the veil. And then here we also have Isis with the veil. And this is kind of a creepy one, right? And some people, this is a really famous statue. And we actually have one, I want to say it's in Indiana, I think. There is one in America. This one is in Europe, and they're all over the place. Statues just like this. And some say it's Isis Artemis. It's actually both goddesses. And it's interesting when we talked about Artemis that she had 3 breasts. And you can't quite see it here, but in a lot of these statues, Isis also has 3 breasts or many breasts. She's covered in breasts. And it's the idea of being like mother to everything, the mother to the world. And you can see she's got this veil here. And the veil of Isis is a really powerful image with a lot of history. And it's the idea Isis as nature, and nature as something that's really mysterious, something that we will never fully and truly understand the mystery of. And so Isis's veil, it's like she will never let you completely know her, but we can perhaps sometimes peel back the veil. And this is why she's associated with witchcraft and magic. Things like Halloween, right? That's the original idea of Halloween, was that this was a day when the veil is thin, that we might have one foot in the sort of quote unquote real world and one foot in the magic world. Or we might be able to more easily access wisdom from the natural world, from the magical world at certain times of day or night, like at evening time, or certain times of year, like solstices. There's this idea that she kind of pulls back her veil a little bit. So she's nature, but she also is sort of the one who gives us a little peek into the magic and the mystery and the wonder of the world. And she's very closely associated with Mother Mary, with Mary Magdalene. And she predates her by way. So the Egyptian gods come way before Christianity. But look at this image here. And so the one on the very left is Isis with her son Horus. Horus Jesus. They even sound alike, don't they? And then we get, so the one on the right is the image of Mary, that probably Mary and Jesus that we see the most, which of course they made her white, right? Which is like what they do because it's white supremacy. But in the middle, you have this one that's probably a little more like what it was truly meant to be in the beginning. And you can see the transition here, how it really looks like Mary came from Isis. And what happened was, you have these Egyptian gods and goddesses, and then eventually the Roman Empire starts to get strong, and the Roman Empire goes and it's like, colonizes and takes everything that it wants to. And the Roman Empire, Christianity starts to develop in the Roman Empire, and Christianity has a real problem with pagan gods. At first they can live together fine, but eventually Christianity and the head-ups in the church are like, no, enough with these pagan gods, and they sort of assimilate a lot of the Egyptian gods and give them new names and assimilate them, say, okay, you're Isis, now we're going to call you Mary, and now you fit in, now you're white. And they make it fit what they want it to fit. And so it's kind of interesting. She's very similar to Mary. Let me find it here. That she is called the Lady of Light. She has a disc. Often she's seen Isis with a big disc of the sun over her head, just like as you can see here, Mary's got the halo around her head. So they have a lot of shared iconography. And then, Mother Mary, that she has this baby with the Holy Ghost, right? She's the virgin as well. And the idea that Isis, her husband, was already dead. So in some ways he was kind of a ghost as well. And so a lot of similarity there. Very mysterious. Oh, and then there was a cult, the cult of Isis, which nobody knows. This is wild that there was the cult of Isis was probably the biggest religious group in that part of Europe and Asia and Africa there, that whole like fertile area. It rivaled Christianity. It was Christianity's biggest competitor for people. And we know nothing about it. It was so secretive. It was like this total secret society that nobody would give up the goods on. So I find that so cool. Talk about a veil and mysterious. It was so mysterious, but all that we know is that initiates went through some sort of a symbolic death and rebirth, which is a lot like born-again Christianity, right? They went through a symbolic death. They were born clean and anew, but that's all we know. But she had huge temples built to her all over the place. Isis was really the main thing until Christianity came and sort of absorbed her. And there was also this idea that the sacrifice of Osiris brings people eternal life. Same way, it's like a Jesus thing. And so very, very similar, all of that. Let me just see if I miss anything. Oh, she's very similar. I don't think we see it in any of these images, no. But she's very similar to Shiva also in that she has this instrument that almost is like, it's like almost like a tennis racket or a paddle, like a chime that she bangs. That's got things that when you turn it, it kind of ding, ding, it makes a chime sound, very much like Shiva's drum. And so Shiva's drum is like the heartbeat of the universe. Some say that it just keeps the universe moving. It's like breathing in and breathing out Shiva's drum every time he bangs it. Some say that every time Shiva bangs the drum, the world is destroyed and recreated again. But it's that same idea that they both have this instrument that's sort of like the heartbeat of the cosmos. And it's also meant to wake you up. It's that, Shiva as the god of destruction, the one who my teacher Douglas used to say, he puts the pebble in your shoe. Like, when you're like going along and you're like, oh, everything's fine, but then you get this pebble in your shoe and it's like, oh man, this is so annoying. And you got to change, you got to stop what you're doing and work on whatever the problem is. And that's sometimes the idea of Shiva, that it's like not to get too comfortable, shake things up. He likes to be a trickster. And Osiris's instrument is that same idea of like banging it to wake you up, saying, don't fall asleep. Don't fall asleep emotionally. Don't fall asleep psychologically. Stay awake. Be open, keep changing, keep learning. And then she also has a lot of similarities. Oh, I missed a chat. Let me see. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. Some similarities with a lot of the other really cool goddesses, those fringe dwelling Hindu goddesses like Dhumavati and Matangi, in that she's often portrayed as old, homeless, kind of wandering around mourning. She misses her husband, right? She really went through a traumatic loss. And so she wanders all over the world, calling out, crying for her husband and mourning. Oh, honey, kid's awake. He always wakes up in the middle of these. And she becomes someone that really, I think she was so popular because everyone could relate to her. You know, that she had this longing, she missed someone, she fought for someone, and her husband was the one that made it so people could have this beautiful afterlife. They really, really loved her and associated her with harmony and justice and mercy. She's also the goddess of nature, compassion, magic, and she's associated with the moon. All these, whenever we find a cool goddess, she's always associated with the moon. I love that. And also the idea of broken pieces and being able to bring the broken pieces back together. And I love that part of it too. And there's a Hindu goddess that's the same way. Her name is Akhilandeshwari. And she's the never not broken goddess, in the same way that Osiris was cut into pieces and she managed to bring those pieces back together. I guess it's a little different. The Hindu goddess is always broken and her power is in her brokenness. But I think in the same way, because she says, you know, if I was all put together, I couldn't change. When my pieces are scattered, I have the ability to put them back together and arrange them any way I want. The goddess of remembering. Yeah, beautiful. Remembering, reintegration, you know, reclaiming our wholeness. It's really beautiful. So any thoughts? I think that's all I have. I have two more goddesses. Oh no, just one more actually, because we did Nut and Isis. But tell me if you have any thoughts about Isis or anything at all before we go on to the cats. I love to hear what you all have to say. No. All right, let me see here. So Bast or Bastet is the cat goddess. Let me put my screen share back on here. Okay, this is a sort of a classical image that you might see of an Egyptian cat. The funny thing is, everyone thinks that Egyptian cats were all these like sleek black cats, but they were actually tabbies. Most of them were orange cats. My cats were probably related to some Egyptian cats, but people thought that they were black because they would mummify them and they would make these statues, and the statues were often made of obsidian or something dark, and they'd be very like, you know, clean and carved and beautiful. But actually, if you go back to like the papyrus and drawings like that, they were actually striped like tabby cats. And what I think is interesting too, this is Bast or Bastet, B-A-S-T or B-A-S-T-E-T, and originally was B-S-S-T, which made me think of like what we do when we call cats, like pss, 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 you know, as that same kind of a thing. And the Egyptian word for cat is just M-W, which is pronounced mew. So it all kind of comes around. And so Bast started actually as, oh, here's another cool image. I just thought she was so gorgeous. Goddess of protection, goddess of cats, but also goddess of the sunrise. So Bast or Bastet, here she is again, was another daughter of Ra, the sun god, or Atum. And so it said that she would ride with Ra as he carried the sun across the sky, and she would protect him from anything that might harm him along the way. And so she's considered this warrior goddess, like a protector, warrior goddess. Her name actually, Bast, means devourer. And so really fierce, and originally was portrayed as a ferocious lion. And like Durga has the lion, right? It's that like fierce warrior goddess thing. But Eventually she turned into a house cat, you know, and there we go again. It's like the woman is too wild. We've got to pacify her. We've got to domesticate her. And so she goes from being this like ferocious, man-killing, like fang, wild, primal lion goddess to being like your basic house cat who's always got kittens suckling at her, which is not a bad thing, of course, but it is a little bit kind of a bummer that they never really want the woman to be super ferocious and fierce. They've always got to domesticate her. So she's, to me, she reminded me a little bit of, I can't think of his name now, the goddess of, Dionysus, like wine and play and music and fun and sort of like party time. She's the goddess of sunrise, music, dance, pleasure, fertility. And then eventually when she becomes more domesticated, she's the goddess of perfume and ointments. Maybe today she'd be the goddess of essential oils. So she, let's see, so what she would do is she would ride with her father Ra during the day when he carried the sun around. And then at night she would transform into a cat or a lion so that she could attack his arch enemy, Apep the snake or the serpent. And so this tells you a lot about why cats were so revered in Egypt. They were really thought of, they didn't worship them. It's sort of a mistake to say that they worshiped cats, but they felt like cats had a small amount of divinity in them, and cats were closely related to the gods and goddesses. Cats protected their crops. Cats protected them from scorpions, you know, like a little baby and the cradle on the floor. Scorpions could easily climb onto the baby. And so the cats would watch the babies and protect the babies from scorpions. The cats would keep them from disease because they would attack and kill the rodents that carried disease. And so really a very practical why cats became so important in their civilization. And I read, I don't know, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, I think, but one article said, you know, without cats, there's a good chance that civilization might not have survived. I don't know, it's kind of funny. So one more, this is a cat, a mummified cat here. And so the cats, you know, let's see, every day she turned into a cat to protect him. At one point in Egypt, you could be put to death for killing a cat. That's how important cats were to them. And what they would do is they would mummify. In this image, you can see a mummified cat. They would mummify cats, and they actually had kind of like we have factory farming now. It's sad, but they had cat farms, and they would just breed these cats just so that they could kill them and mummify them and put them in tombs with people. And I'll show you an image. This is what it would be in tombs. So this is a mummy. Inside a statue like this would be a mummified cat. And in an epic example of colonization and cultural appropriation in a terrible way, the British took there were so many mummified cats, hundreds of thousands, that the British actually took 180,000 of them, brought them back to England and used them as fertilizer for their lawns. Oh, I know. They were so awful. It was really terrible that they did that. But mummified cats were a bestseller in Egypt. It was like everybody needed a mummified cat to bring with them. They would take their own house cats. And there's we don't know exactly what's true about this or not, but there are some sort of tall tales about how in Egypt, if someone's cat died of natural causes, the people would shave their eyebrows off in grief as a signifier of their grief. And if their dog died of natural causes, they would shave all the hair on their body off. And we don't know 100% if that's true or not. And then Ptolemy, the Greek scholar, also said that when the Egyptians went to battle with the Persians outsmarted them by drawing cats on all the shields of their armor so that the Egyptians didn't want to hurt them. And they led the army with a parade of cats and dogs. And in that way, they tricked and defeated the Egyptians, which I think it just says so much about the Egyptians and how lovely that is, that they loved their animals so much. And it was said that if a house was burning, the only thing that they worried about was getting the cats out. And cats were considered really especially helpful because if a cat ran through a burning house, it was thought to take the flames out with it. And so cats are the patron. The Bast and Bastet are the patron goddess of firefighters in Egypt. Let's see, so common, and really that's about it, I think. The cat was also called the Eye of Ra, which we talked about in the very beginning, that because she protected him. She thought that cats, it's the same idea, that cats are like the super protectors, the mothers of the world that watch out, that make sure the babies don't get bit by the scorpions, that make sure everyone's okay. And so in the same way as that all-seeing eye, cats are sort of like these all-seeing protectors of all beings. So if you have any thoughts to share, that was a whole lot. There's a few more. I thought maybe next week we'd finish with some of the other Egyptian goddesses, but what you think? Quiet today.
So I wanted to share, this is totally, just disclaimer, like totally out there, but I have an esoteric teacher, my esoteric acupuncture teacher, and he's like way out there. He's like, I got these ideas from the Green Devas, like no acupuncture school will even invite him to teach. But he often talks about how you can find a portal to other dimensions based on where your cat likes to sit. And that if there's a spot where your cat likes, my dog is coming to hear this, the dogs will avoid it, but the cats will like hang out there. So.
Whoa, that's so cool. I love that. I don't know. I realized just yesterday, actually, my cat always sits in the same, right under that door right there. That's his spot, like 24/7. Surprised he's not there now. But then the other day, I never opened that closet. It's like winter stuff, and I opened it, and it was cold in there. It's like, that's why he's, but maybe that cold is like, it's like the wardrobe to Narnia. Maybe there's some other icy world through there. I love that. I love it. I love anybody who believes wild things. You know, that's the whole thing. Like in Yin last night, we were talking about believing in magic, like believing in the mystery and the wonder, and not losing that. When you lose that childlike sense of anything is possible, it's sad, you know, you become jaded. You love learning about them. It's, yeah, Amelia, it's pretty new to me too. So I love it. I'm so happy to have people to share it with and talk about it with. Jack Cornfield told this story, he tells it often about his daughter and how she believed in the tooth fairy, right? Like all little kids do at some point. And have you heard this story? Let him tell it, anybody? Oh, it's great. He tells it all the time. But he says, you know, his daughter was starting to get older. I don't know what grade she was in. But at that point, you know, where like she was maybe going to be the last one who didn't know that the tooth fairy wasn't real. And some of Jack Cornfield's friends were like, you know, as a parent, this is, you really should like tell her what's what and be, you know, be realistic, tell her the truth. And so he's like, oh, okay, I guess I have to be a good dad. And he goes home that day and he sits her down and he says, honey, I have to tell you something. He says, I'm actually the tooth fairy. She was like, oh, where's your dress? So, you know, he's like, why? Don't spoil it, you know? It's so amazing. So I think that all these gods and goddesses really connect us to that, of just like, don't lose the magic. Stay close to the wild mystery of it, and you know, believe in things that are beyond what our eye can see. Awesome. Well, we will keep going with these. I don't know where we're going with it, but I love it. So I will see you next week or next time. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks, Kelly.